Hey everybody, what is up? It's Not a Newbie back again in the building. What is poppin', you guys? Not a Newbie. How are you guys doing? Let's see here. I'm really excited for this stream because today we're finally going to be doing the React series that I promised you guys. A lot of you guys have expressed interest in this, and I thought it'd be a really cool thing to do. So today I'm going to be reacting to the first ever televised presidential debate. This is going to be a series where I go through and react to all of the old presidential debates, going back from the first one ever televised to present day. So that one should be fun. That should be exciting. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be interesting to see how politics and political discourse has changed over the years. I think it'll be a really fun and interesting way to explore that as well. Let's see, but before we start with that, and something else that I kind of wanted to talk about. Look, here's the thing. A lot of you guys, especially people who are just starting out streaming, are very conscious with how your audio sounds. If you're anything like me, I've spent a lot of time very meticulously going through and figuring out how to get my audio sounding exactly how I want it to sound. And it's taken me forever. I'm finally, I think very close to where I want my sound to be sounding, my audio to be sounding today. And I think one of the things that people notice at first, they're like, why is my voice so quiet? Why is my voice so loud? And people try to address this problem in ways that aren't always the most effective. And I think, to use a case study, I'm sorry, my guy Thorben, but I want to take a look at this video here. These two streams, okay? This is both of us streaming at the same time. This is Thorben streaming from his setup. This is what his audio sounds like of his microphone.
I love Sniper. Well, I am that good with them.
All right, that's what his microphone sounds like. Okay, it does kind of sound like it could use a little bit of work, but here's what his microphone sounds like from my point of view.
All right, have you gotten a kill yet?
Nope.
He doesn't deserve a kill.
Thanks. All right, fun times. Very great stream, and I hope you guys go back and watch the VODs for that if you guys have the time. But I think what's most interesting about this whole thing is I was watching his VOD, right? And I was like, how come his microphone sounds a lot worse on his own stream than it does on mine? And then I started to realize something. I remember back in the a few months ago, one of you guys had submitted a clip for me to post on the Clips channel, and you guys had decided, hey, this sound is way too quiet. Why don't I turn up the gain? So I listened to it, and it's like blasted, right? It's nothing but clipping the entire time, and I'm like, this sounds terrible audio. I think I ended up posting it anyways, but that absolutely destroyed what my microphone sounded like. You didn't need to pull the gain up. As a matter of fact, a lot of you guys are looking at your streams and your content and you're like, hey, my microphone's too quiet. I need to turn it up. No, if your microphone's too quiet, turning it up is probably should be the last resort. Here's what you guys really should be doing. You guys really should be using compression on your microphone. Compression is something that will that can make your audio sound louder, but at the same time, once you do start screaming and stuff, your audio is not going to be crazy distorted. And let me bring my streaming stuff over to this camera here, because I actually usually don't have my stream set up here in this view. Now, if you look at all my filters, I have quite a few filters here, and I'm not going to break them all down now. I actually have a video on my personal account where I sort of explore all of this, but the one that I want to point to is the compression. These are the compression settings that I have now. They more or less keep the volume here at a reasonable level. So that means that no matter if I'm talking like this or if I'm shouting like this, you guys generally still hear my microphone at a normal voice. You can see kind of in that red bar there how much the compressor is applying to my voice. But to be a little bit more relevant, let me show you guys what it sounds like when instead of using a compressor, I turn up the gain. So this is what it sounds like with the compressor off. So you see, if I'm like talking really quiet like this, you can't really hear me when I pick up. But when I start shouting, you get clipping, right? And so this is why you really don't want to. This is why you don't want to rely on gain, because if you use gain to get the volume that you want, it will only apply when you're speaking in a certain tone. Now, of course, there's always the age-old question of, hey, I'm going to use my compressor. How much compression should I use? Should I, set a high ratio or a low ratio? A higher ratio will compress more, a lower ratio will compress less. There's a lot that goes into that. I would generally say, from personal experience, it all depends on how much sound you want to pick up and how much sound your microphone picks up. If you only want to pick up your own voice, I would say actually you probably want to use a noise gate. And then do noise gating was the way to go. There's a lot that goes into it. Higher, basically, if you want to catch everything in the room, you want to use a high ratio, because then it'll compress basically as much as possible. But if you only want to like pick up like certain things or certain like volume, then you may want to have a lower ratio, because then it will make less things louder. But either way, it's generally a good idea to use a compressor, because then you're not going to have crazy clipping like you saw in that clip earlier. And I'm surprised that you don't hear more people, talking about this. I guess you do have a lot of people discussing it, but it's a really easy way, especially when people are like, hey, my voice is too quiet. The first thing they do is go turn it up. No, that's not what you want to do. What you want to do is actually compress it. So, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you guys found that interesting. If you guys want me to talk more about streaming stuff and the things that I am learning as I'm streaming, let me know in the comments below what types of things you want to hear me talk about when it comes. When it comes to talk about streaming. I have a pair here. I almost accidentally dropped. But that's pretty much all I have as far as the audio advice is concerned. I just thought it was interesting. I don't usually go around parading streaming advice, even though streaming advice is interesting to throw around, but it's just something that I find very obvious that a lot of people get wrong, so I kind of wanted to address it here, especially since I have an applicable example. So, yeah. Alrighty. This means that, let's see. I don't want to wait for more people to get in, but actually I just want to get into the reaction. Let's see here. So here we go, boys. Here we go. This here is the first presidential debate ever broadcast. Now, if you guys want me to react to primaries, this playlist only has general election debates. It doesn't have primary debates. So if you want me to react to primary debates, I can react to those as well. Just let me know in the comments below. But let's get into this. I have no idea kind of what to expect. I did actually wait a second. yo I'm getting everything out of order. Before I do this, I have to do my political compass test. I have to do a political compass test because I want to kind of like show/find where I'm at on the political compass before I start reacting to these debates. I think it'd be interesting, and some of you guys might might think it helps me. Let's see here. Help contextualize my positions. Now there are multiple. Now I think about it. There are multiple tests here. Let's see. What's a good political compass test? Let's see here. Political compass test. I guess if I Google it, I'll find the right one. There's a website called politicaltest.com. Okay. Let me see here. Is this it? All right. This is gonna be cool. All right, here we go. Now I'm gonna take the political compass test. Now, it says here, before taking the test, please note that this isn't a survey and these aren't questions. They're propositions. Okay, it's an interesting way to phrase phrase everything. To question the logic of individual ones that irritate you, you miss the point. I mean, if you're gonna write like bad questions or postulates or propositions, I am gonna criticize it. So, let's see. Some propositions are extreme, some are moderate. That's how we can show you whether you lean towards extremism or moderation on the compass. Your responses should not be overthought. Some of them are intentionally vague, but that's dumb. Their purpose is to trigger reactions in the mind, measuring feelings and prejudices rather than detailed opinions on policy. Okay, I feel like detailed opinions on policy would be like the most effective, effectual, and helpful way to go about it. But I don't know. Here we go. Page 1 of 6. All right. Just a few propositions to start with concerning, that's how you see the country in the world. All right. Here it is. If economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity rather than the interests of transnational corporations. That's a terrible, what a ridiculous statement, because this assumes that those two things are diametrically opposed. Serve humanity rather than the interests of transnational corporations? I would say agree. Because I think if you are going to say that they can help either one or the other, I would pick humanity. But I don't know. Let's see. I'd always support my country whether it was right or wrong. Strongly disagree. No one chooses their country of birth, so it's foolish to be proud of it. I agree to a certain extent. I think it's fine to be, if you want to be. Now, pride is a sin, right? So I'm not going to say like general traditional pride is great, but I do think it's fine to be like, oh yeah, I'm happy that I was born in this country. If your country is a good country and has ideals that you support. Otherwise, I think just blind support of your country because you were born there is really stupid. Let's see here. Are races many superior qualities compared to others? Okay, strongly disagree. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Technically, usually I would say agree somewhat, but because I've seen Succession, I'm going to say disagree. Once you beat your mutual enemy, you are going to be enemies again. That's why I'm going to say disagree here. Military action that defies international law is sometimes justified. Strongly agree. Do you guys know how many different countries there are and how many different laws there are? You're inevitably going to break international law when you're doing military action. So of course, I think it's I'd have to say strongly agree on that front. There's now a worrying fusion of information and entertainment. I would say disagree. I think that what's upsetting is not necessarily that there's a fusion of information and entertainment, but there's a fusion of information and propaganda. Now, they sometimes make things propagandistic by fusing it with entertainment, but being paired with entertainment in and of itself is not a bad thing. All right, let's see here. People are ultimately divided more by class than by. Oh, it says here, now the economy. We're talking attitudes here, not the FTSE index. I don't know what that is. People are ultimately divided more by class than by nationality. Interesting. This is really hard. Because I don't know if we're talking about in the world or inside the country. I'd say if you're inside the country, you're comparing people within the country, they're definitely separated more by class. But if you're talking about people globally, then they're separated more by nationality because, classes are different between countries, right? I think that if we're talking about, I'm going to assume we're talking about like within your own country, and I'm going to say agree. Because in America, I think people are definitely more divided by class than by nationality. And maybe even more so, I think people are actually divided more by political affiliation than nationality, if I'm going to be honest here. Controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. I would say agree. I would have to say I agree. That's really tough, but I have to say agree. I agree. Because unemployment is something that naturally follows inflation, right? One would think that you could actually mitigate unemployment by controlling inflation. Now, it doesn't mean you won't have unemployment, but I think one could reasonably assume that it would help. All right, because corporations cannot be trusted. Bad postulate. But because corporations cannot be trusted to voluntarily protect the environment, they require regulation. Strongly disagree. Okay, disagree. As a Christian, right? I have to say we have a responsibility to take care of the earth. So I do think that maybe some regulations are warranted. Maybe. From each according to his ability, to each according to his need, is a fundamentally good idea. What the heck does this mean? What does it even mean? Oh, hold on. Wrong page. Let's see here. What does that even mean? From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Does that mean that we should give as much as we can to the people who need it the most? Okay, here it is. It's a phrase from Karl Marx. It says, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. The principle refers to free access to and distribution of goods, capital, and services in the market idea as a whole. Because I think that, all philosophies more or less have some really good, ideas towards them, even if the policies behind them are bad. So let's see here. The idea is that with the full development of socialism and unfettered productive forces, there will be enough to satisfy everyone's needs. But what does that mean, like, one should do, though? Let's see. Okay. In Ayn Rand's 1957 pro-capitalist novel Atlas Shrugged, a larger profitable motor company adopted the slogan as its method for determining employee compensation. The system quickly fell prey to corruption and greed, forcing the most capable employees to work overtime in order to satisfy the needs of the least competent and funnel money to the owners. Huh. That's interesting. Interesting. I don't even know how that's a logical conclusion. I don't know. I don't think I completely grasp this idea. So it's hard for me to say, oh yeah, I agree, or yeah, I disagree. Hold on, let me see. My monitor's kind of acting up right now. Give me a second. Yeah, so it's hard for me to say that I disagree or that I agree with this. I think I'm going to say it like this, right? From how I understand it, what this is saying is, from everyone who has, from everyone who's able to like produce or create something, they should give what they have to people who need that specific thing. And I'm going to say, as a Christian, agree, right? Not strongly agree, because I don't think you should give away everything, But I do think that to some extent we do agree. Now, as a political policy, I say disagree because I don't believe in legislating some sort of morality. I'm not a religious righty or theocrat. Let's see, the free of the market, the free of the people, strongly agree. Let's see here. It's a sad. Now that's in effect, right? Not in policy. So you can have policies that have completely free markets, but then you can have like monopolistic forces within those markets that shackle the people. So, but in practice, in principle, yes. This is here. It's a sad reflection on our society that something as basic as drinking water is now a bottled, branded consumer product. Strongly disagree. Land shouldn't be a commodity to be bought or sold. Strongly disagree. It is regrettable that many personal fortunes are made by people who simply manipulate money and contribute nothing to their society. I would say disagree. I think that people should be able to manipulate money if they want to. Now, should they manipulate money? No. I assume that what they're talking about really there is investing, right? So buying money into stocks and bonds. I don't think they're talking about like something like insider trading or anything like that, which is an entirely different thing. That's corruption. That's not a particular practice. Protectionism is sometimes necessary in a trade. It's really tough because sometimes that's the only way your country will be able to have play internationally. But I'd have to say disagree because that can cause really bad issues, like the baby formula crisis that was caused by protectionism. So I just say because of the pitfalls it could cause to consumers within your country, I'd have to disagree with that. Now, let's see. The only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver a profit to its shareholders. Strongly disagree. Now, whether or not we legislate that social responsibility is entirely different. But I do think, companies have a social responsibility to do more than just deliver profit to shareholders. The rich are too highly taxed. Strongly agree. Those with the ability to pay should have access to higher standards of medical care. Strongly agree. Governments should penalize businesses that mislead the public. Agree. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multinationals to create monopolies. That's really tough. And the thing is, like the current mechanisms that we have to actually do this don't even work. I think in general, I disagree, but I think I'd have to say agree just because there are many cases where I do wish that the government would step in and be like, no, that's really tough. That's really tough. I have to say disagree because it's not actually genuinely free, right? If the government's saying you can't form this monopoly. To a certain extent, monopolies may form if that's what people want. All right, let's see here. Now let's let's look at some of your personal social values. Okay, personal social values. All right. So when I do these votes, I'm not saying what should be legislated. I'm just saying my personal opinions. Let's see here. Abortion, when a woman's life is not threatened, should always be illegal. Strongly agree. Authority should be questioned. Agree to a certain extent. It doesn't mean that they should be rebelled against or revolted against, but they should be questioned. Let's see here. An eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. Strongly disagree. Taxpayers should not be expected to prop up any theaters or museums that cannot survive on a commercial basis. I'd say agree, a soft agree there, If there was a neutral option, I would pick that. Schools should not make classroom attendance compulsory. Strongly disagree. What kind of idea? What? What? No, that's kind of dumb. When I say this as someone who skipped classes before. All people have their rights, but it is better for all of us that different sorts of people should keep to their own. Strongly disagree. Strongly disagree. If people are so different from each other, then they'll naturally separate, right? And then naturally, the groups of people that you see, like, you know, associating and with each other and hanging out with each other, they're doing that because they're similar. So, you know, if you're mad at certain types of people are associating with each other, getting married to each other, oh well, too bad. You know, people who are similar to each other are going to do what people who are similar to each other do, which is hang out with each other, spend time with each other, and maybe occasionally marry. Good parents sometimes have to spank their children. Strongly agree. It's natural for children to keep some secrets from their parents. Strongly agree. Possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense. Strongly agree. There we go. The prime function of schooling should be to equip the future generation to find jobs. That's really good. Yeah, I agree with that strongly. That's good. I wasn't expecting that to be on this quiz. That's great. People with serious inheritable disabilities should not be allowed to reproduce. Strongly disagree. Was that like a eugenics question right here? Right? Because this leads you down the road to the Ubermensch. Right? That's Nazi. That's Nazi logic. Let's see here. The most important thing for children to learn is to accept discipline. Agree. There is no savage and civilized people, only just different cultures. Strongly disagree. Those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society's support. I'd say strongly agree. When you are troubled, it's better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things. Disagree. I think there's a balance there. But in general, it's a bad policy. People wallow in their misery, which I think is unhealthy, right? But then people try to suppress all the bad things that are going on with them mentally until they can't hold it in anymore and everything just breaks and falls apart. And then you wonder why people have these breakdowns. Well, maybe it's because you've been holding in all this stuff for 30 years. You know? You know? But then also people like wonder why they're like depressed, and then also the same thing. It's like, well, maybe it's because you've been thinking about nothing but everything bad that's happened to you in your life for 30 years as well. You know? So there's a balance. There's a balance. All right. First generation immigrants can never be fully integrated within their new country. I have to say agree, because you're always going to be culturally congruent most culturally congruent with your upbringing. Even if you, like, as you grow up, you know, assimilate yourself into a different culture, you're still going to have those trappings of the society you grew up in. So yeah, I'm going to have to say agree. What's good for the most successful corporations is always ultimately good for all of us. Strongly disagree. No broadcasting institution, however independent, its content should receive public funding. I'd say agree, although in general, I think that like public funding in general is a bad idea. Next page. Page 4 of 6. How you see the wider society. Interesting. Our civil liberties are being excessively curbed in the name of counterterrorism. Strongly agree. A significant advantage of a one-party state is that it avoids all the arguments that delay progress of the democratic political system strongly disagree. Sorry. A lot of that progress is bad. Political gridlock is usually better than political progress, generally speaking. Right? Political gridlock keeps things from getting worse. Right? Now, does it prevent things from getting better? True, there's that aspect of things as well. But I think, yeah, generally political gridlock is a good thing. Although the electronic age makes online surveillance easier, only wrongdoers need to be worried. Strongly disagree. That's like saying you should only be worried about the Gestapo if you're doing something wrong. You know? Okay. The death penalty should be an option for the most serious crimes. Strongly agree. In a civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed and people below to be commanded. I would have to say strongly agree. I have trouble picturing where this is a bad thing. And typically if you see equity, that's where things get worse in a society. What matters most actually is whether or not there are hierarchies at all, but whether or not those hierarchies can be traversed, whether or not there's equal social mobility, equal mobility between all the classes and statuses and everything. Abstract art that doesn't represent anything shouldn't be considered art at all. I would say strongly disagree. In criminal justice, punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. It's really tough. That's really tough. I think that they both are equally important. I think as a Christian, I would have to say punishment because you see in if you look at like a scriptural like examples and things, you don't see much of a focus on rehabilitation that I know of, just the punishment. But I would have to say for what I think a policy should be, how I see society? How I personally see society, okay, I'd say agree. Punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. It's a waste of time to try and rehabilitate some criminals. Strongly agree. The business person and the manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. Strongly disagree. Mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be homemakers. I think they're equally important. For mothers specifically. I have to say agree. The first duty is to be homemakers. Now I will say it's agree and not strongly agree because I think that mothers can be homemakers while still having careers. But if we're talking like the difference between being a homemaker in general and being a stay-at-home mom specifically, two different things. Multinational companies are unethically exploiting the plant genetic resources of developing countries. I don't know exactly what they're talking about, but I'm gonna say agree because I do know that we do exploit some resources like cobalt and whatnot, and we also get natural resources out in a dirty way when really we should be using like more like cleaner methods to go about this. Making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity. Strongly disagree. Next. All right, now we're on page 5 of 6. It says if you got through that, okay, you'll find these propositions on religion a breeze, okay? Astrology accurately explains many things. Strongly disagree. You not be more without being religious. Strongly agree. Right? Now, this doesn't mean like specifically like organized religion. People make up their own like religions. I think political ideologies in a way are their own religion, especially since people tend to even, in many cases, put their political values over their religious values. Right? You see a lot of Christians kind of picking ideological positions that to align with the world rather than aligning with what Scripture says. So yeah, definitely agree. Because even outside of or like traditionally recognized organized religions, you have political ideologies that essentially function as religions. So, strongly agree. Charity is better than Social Security as a means of helping the generally disenfranchised. I would say agree, because it's generally better to, I would say it's better to have charity than Social Security, but I will say also that sometimes charity can't support everyone. Some people are naturally unlucky. I would say agree on that one. It is important that my child's school instills religious values. I would say strongly disagree there. Right? Because I think religious values should be taught at home. Especially since, like, I don't know, I think that like, if me as a parent personally, I'd better trust myself to teach religious values than the school. Next page. All right, finally. Let's see here. Page 6 out of 6. Finally, a look at sex. This one should be easy, I think. Sex outside of marriage is usually immoral. Strongly agree. A same-sex couple in a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from the possibility of child adoption. Strongly disagree there. Pornography depicting consenting adults should be legal for the adult population. Legal, I would say strongly agree, but I mean, you shouldn't consume it. But I think as far as like political policy, I mean, yeah, I mean that would get into like censorship, which I think is like pretty bad for obvious reasons. You see, what goes on in a private bedroom between consenting adults is no business of the state. I think is a really bad way to phrase what they're talking about, but I would have to say strongly agree there. No one can feel naturally homosexual. I would say disagree. You know, I'm not a member of the LGBT community, but I would have to say some people I think just are probably naturally inclined to feel that way. I think that we probably overestimate the amount of people who do, but I mean, I would say, yeah, it's possible, but don't quote me on that because I can't put myself in the head of everyone who's a homosexual, so I can't really speak for them on that. These days, openness about sex has gone too far. Strongly agree. All right, let's see where I'm at on the political spectrum. Let's see here. Okay, here it is. Okay, about the political compass. There we go. But the start of the original political compass is in 2001. We recognized the inadequacy of the standard political measure, left and right. Certainly fine for discussing economics, but to this day, it is still widely and wrongly used to describe social attitudes. France's National Front, for example, is popularly described as far right, yet its economic policies have sometimes been to the left of even the French Socialist Party. The party's real extremism is in the social attitudes. That's why we added a social scale. Nice. Nevertheless, the more nationalistic and authoritarian a party is, the more right-wing they're still labeled. This, of course, is absurd. Exactly. Taken to its logical conclusion, it means that the further left the country sits, the more socially liberal its attitudes are. On that basis, North Korea must be a shining model of human rights and social freedoms. This is based. Why don't more people look at politics this way? This is like, yeah, the authoritarian versus libertarian model is far more important if we're talking about what policies should be enacted when it comes to politics than left and right, in my opinion. Conversely, a country should be very right-wing. Conversely, a country may be very right-wing, i.e. libertarian, in its economics and authoritarian, and be authoritarian at the same time. Singapore's person. That's interesting. The Index of Economic Freedom produced by the Wall Street Journal and the Conservative Heritage Foundation hails Singapore as the economic freest nation on earth in 2021. Social scale, however, is a very different story. Human Rights Watch details its findings for finding Singapore a deeply authoritarian state. I have no stake in the matter. I don't really follow Singaporean politics personally. Singapore politics. That's how little I follow Singapore, okay? I don't even know how to say the word. Okay. Let's take a look at a few contrasting nations on this chart. North Korea is far left and far authoritarian. China is pretty centrist socially, but very authoritarian. Saudi Arabia is pretty far right, but also very authoritarian. Singapore is all the way to the right, but a little less authoritarian than Saudi Arabia. Uruguay is pretty centrist when it comes to authoritarianism versus libertarianism, but they're pretty far right as well, and the same can be said for Switzerland. Now let's see what the text here says further. Uruguay is currently rated the world's 44th most free economy and a leading Latin American light in social freedoms, from gay and lesbian rights to legislation on cannabis. Switzerland also has a high rating as a libertarian economy, while at the same time providing a wide range of social welfare programs, in common with the Nordic states as a number of other Western countries, with the exception of Hong Kong region. China maintains strong economic controls though fewer than those associated with a more orthodox ruling Communist Party. In recent years, China stood closer to the totally repressive and the totally repressive social climate of North Korea, where the economy also is under the absolute control of the state. Saudi Arabia has also veered further towards a libertarian economy in recent times, but with no real relaxation of its sweeping authoritarian powers. All right, let's see here. Your political compass. I'm like right in the middle. What the heck? What the heck? I'm like almost in the middle. I feel like, and I think I took this test before, and I was literally like right here. I actually thought it would put me farther to the right and more libertarian. But let's see, boys. This is where I'm at. Now, what I want to see here, I would love to have you guys like viewing, join my Discord, take the political compass test, and then post where you guys are at. I'm actually going to go and post this in my Discord now. Let's see here. Did the political compass test, boys? And a link to the political compass, not the political compass. The link to my Discord is in the description below. It's dscrd.ntnwb.cc. There you go. But this is where I am. Interesting. So I'm about as centrist as I could possibly be. Claim your free political compass certificate. What? Oh, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna claim this. Certificate download should begin shortly. If it does not, use the following link. Yo. I'm saving that. That's fire. That's very cool. Join 27 caricatures of your most beloved and loathed political figures on a personalized color certificate that you can download or print in moments. Interesting. Okay. Very cool. Very cool, boys. Very cool. So now, you guys know what time it is. Oh, hey, Alexander, what's up? Now you guys know what time it is. It's time to finally begin the reaction to the first ever televised presidential debate. I'm kind of excited. I don't really know too much about these guys' policies, so it'll be interesting to react to them. This is JFK versus Nixon in the first presidential debate, the ever televised. 1960 was the election that this was for. This one, let's see here. Let's read the synopsis from PBS NewsHour, just kind of get a little bit of background. The 1960 presidential cycle featured former Senator JFK of Massachusetts, the Democratic nominee, and Vice President Richard Nixon, a Republican. The first debate, and the first ever to be televised, featured a long-hour discussion on domestic issues. moderated by Howard K. Smith of CBS with questions posed by a panel of journalists. Okay, interesting. The debate took place on September 26, 1960 in Chicago. All right, now without further ado, let's get into this. This is going to be fun. Here we go. I'm looking forward to this.
Good evening. The television and radio stations of the United States and their affiliated stations...
Hold up, sorry, my bad. I'm going to turn up the compression here, because you guys might not...
They never taught me about this in school.
You guys might not be able to hear everything very well. I'm gonna crank up the compression. Let me know if it sounds bad. I'm just doing it because it's looking like on the levels it might be hard to hear. Like I said, they never taught me about this in school. That's interesting. This debate was actually famous for its reaction. So the most
said in the chat.
Here's the thing about this debate. People who listen to this debate on the radio
said in the chat.
They came away with a more favorable perspective of the debates than people who watched it on TV. Well, no, that's not it. Or maybe it was a different one. Maybe it was a different debate. There was one of those debates where it was like people had like opposing opinions on who won the debate based on like whether or not it was televised or not. So anyways, here we go. It's Kennedy versus Nixon, first 1960 presidential debate. And again, let me know if the compression is too much, if it makes it sound better or worse.
Good evening. The television and radio stations of the United States and their affiliated stations are proud to provide...
Just going to try and make sure you guys can hear.
...of issues in the current political campaign by the two major candidates for the presidency. The candidates need no introduction. The Republican candidate, Vice President Richard M. Nixon, and the Democratic candidate, Senator John F. Kennedy. According to rules set by the candidates themselves, each man shall make an opening statement of approximately 8 minutes duration and a closing statement of approximately 3 minutes duration. In between, the candidates will answer or comment upon answers to questions put by a panel of correspondents. In this, the first discussion in a series of 4 joint appearances, the subject matter has been agreed will be restricted to internal or domestic American matters. And now,
all right, interesting.
Statement by Senator John F. Kennedy.
Said in the chat. Yeah, it's really quiet.
Is it still quiet?
Mr. Pizza.
1860.
Said in the
Abraham
chat.
Lincoln said the question was whether this nation could exist, half slave.
All right, hold on. Sorry, I'm gonna crank up. Okay, hold on. I'm gonna crank up the Let's see here.
Free. Who said the question?
Okay, let me know how this sounds.
Opening statement by Senator John F. Kennedy.
I just changed my compression settings, so let me know how this sounds.
Yeah, Nixon. In the election of 1860, Abraham Lincoln said the question.
Is that better? Is that better?
In this, the first discussion in a series of 4
the levels are looking good on my end.
Appearances, the subject matter has been agreed will be restricted to internal or domestic American matters. And now for the first opening statement by Senator John F. Kennedy.
All right.
Yeah, Nixon.
I know that these guys had to like get up and go to the
chat.
And go to the podium. That's
fine.
interesting.
Mr. Pizza said in the chat. Better.
Okay, look at you, because while I fixed it for you, I still have to crank it up on my end.
In the election of 1860, Abraham Lincoln said the question was whether this nation could exist, half slave or half free. In the election of 1960, and with the world around us, the question is whether the world will exist, half slave or half free, whether it will move in the direction of freedom, in the direction of the road that we are taking, or whether it will move in the direction of slavery. I think it will depend in great measure upon what we do here in the United States, that we build, on the kind of strength that we maintain. We discussed tonight domestic issues, but I would not want that to be any implication to be given that this does not involve directly our struggle with Mr. Khrushchev for survival. Mr. Khrushchev is in New York, and he maintains the communist offensive throughout the world because of the productive power of the Soviet Union itself. The Chinese communists have always had a large population. But they are important and dangerous now because they are mounting a major effort within their own country. The kind of country we have here, the kind of society we have, the kind of strength we build in the United States will be the defense of freedom. If we do well here.
So it looks like what he's saying is you have to defend freedom at home. I think that's fair. It's pretty fair. And now he says, like, you know, he's basically saying that the thesis statement of the country is to defend freedom. I hope that what he's not talking about is a very, like, interventionist method of defending freedom, which means basically invading other countries and forcing them to be capitalists, which we know how great that worked out in Vietnam.
If we meet our obligations, if we're moving ahead, then I think freedom will be secure around the world. If we fail, then freedom fails. Therefore, I think the question before the American people is, are we doing as much as we can do? Are we as strong as we should be? Are we as strong as we must be if we're going to maintain our independence? And if we're going to maintain and hold out the hand of friendship to those who look to us for assistance, to those who look to us for survival? I should make it very clear that I do not think we're doing enough, that I am not satisfied as an American with the progress that we are making. This is a great country, but I think it could be a greater country. It is a powerful country, but I think it could be a more powerful country.
Why don't people talk like this, right? I think that people act like, in order to, like, politicians, right? In order to, and this goes to the right and the left, right? I think the left has fallen into this more than the right, just because in recent years the left has had less political power than the right, and so you can't be like, oh, the country stinks if you guys are if you're, like, you know, in charge, right? But why don't people say, hey, this country's good, but it can be better, rather than acting like you have to put the country down in order to say, like, it's great? Like, if you look at right-wing politicians, they're like, oh, the country's a cesspool of wokeness and all this stuff, which, granted, wokeness is kind of plaguing the country right now, but that's not all there is to the country. There's still a lot of good, like, to the country. You can't, like, act as if, like, the country, just because there's some things that you don't like about the country doesn't mean like the whole country is bad.
I'm not satisfied to have 50% of our steel mill capacity unused.
Whoa, what? That's what was happening? Okay, what was causing that? Was that, like, government policy that was restricting the use of the steel mills, or was just the economy bad? Maybe those things go hand in hand. I don't know, but that sounds a lot similar to how basically Joe Biden is forcing all of our oil production to shut down, more or less, gradually. But that's real. That's a good take. It's a good take.
I'm not satisfied when the United States had last
Said
year
in the chat.
the lowest rate of
Based
economic
JFK.
growth of any major industrialized society in the world.
There's some parallels here. If the economy at the time is how he's describing it is, like, actually how it's taking place, it reminds me kind of what we're seeing today.
Because economic growth means strength and vitality. It means we're able to sustain our defenses. It means we're able to meet our commitments abroad.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not satisfied when we have over $9 billion worth of food, some of it rotting, even though there is a hungry world, and even though 4 million Americans wait every month for a food package from the government.
Whoa, that's interesting. So what he's saying is people are producing tons of food, but people can't get it for some reason. Now I don't understand why exactly we would have a surplus of produced food, but not allow that food to be sold to Americans nor people abroad. That's interesting. That's interesting. I kind of wonder if how he's positioning the state of the country is actually accurate.
Which averages 5 cents a day per individual. I saw cases in West Virginia, here in the United States, where children took home part of their school lunch in order to feed their families, because I don't think we're meeting our obligation towards these Americans. I'm not satisfied when the Soviet Union is turning out twice as many scientists and engineers as we are. I'm not satisfied when many of our teachers are inadequately paid, or when our children go to school part-time shifts. I think we should have an educational system second to none.
Now, you gotta understand here, everything he's saying, these are basic positive platitudes. Everybody wants these things. Nobody is saying that teachers want to be paid less. Nobody is saying that people want all American families to be hungry. But the question always has to bounce back to what are you going to do to solve these problems. So it's easy to cheer on JFK now, but we'll see what solutions he's proposing to these issues.
I'm not satisfied when I see men like Jimmy Hoffa in charge of the largest union in the United States, still free. I'm not satisfied.
Wait, what? Say it again?
Largest union in the United States. Satisfied. We should have an educational system second to none. I'm not satisfied when I see men like Jimmy Hoffa in charge of the largest union in the United States, still free.
I don't know who he is, but he sounds anti-union, which I think in a way is based, although I think if, we want to lean more towards libertarian, less towards authoritarianism, you have to allow unions to exist, but interesting.
I'm not satisfied when we are failing to develop the natural resources of the United States to the fullest.
Okay.
Here in the United States, which developed the Tennessee Valley and which built the Grand Coulee and the other dams in the Northwest United States, at the present rate of hydropower production, and that is the hallmark of an industrialized society, the Soviet Union by 1975 will be producing more power than we are. These are all the things, I think, in this country that can make our society strong or can mean that it stands still. I'm not satisfied until every American enjoys his full constitutional rights. If a Negro baby is born, and this is true also of Puerto Ricans.
These are different times. Right. Right? Like, he's not saying the N-word. These are different times, different lingo. So, keep that in mind.
And still. I'm not satisfied until every American enjoys his full constitutional rights. If a Negro baby is born, and this is true also of Puerto Ricans and Mexicans in some of our cities, he has about 1/2 as much chance to get through high school as a white baby.
Is he going to talk about why? Because there are multiple things, especially in the 60s, multiple things that contributed to this.
He has 1/3 as much chance to get through college as a white student. He has about 1/3 as much chance to be a professional man, about 1/2 as much chance to own a house. He has about 4 times as much chance that he'll be out of work in his life as the white baby. I think we can do better.
Said in the
I
chat.
don't want the talents of any American.
These are different times, but I was gonna say.
Yeah. No, if he was racist, he would have just come out and said the N-word. Right? So, yeah. That's kind of what I'm getting at behind my different times perspective. If he was saying that, now, if someone was going to say that today, I'd be like, hold up, come on, man. But this is the 1960s, right? I feel like in general, getting people not to say the N-word in the 1960s would be a dub.
He has about 4 times as much chance that he'll be out of work in his life as the white baby. I think we can do better. I don't want the talents of any American to go to waste. I know that there are those who say that we want to turn everything over to the government. I don't at all. I want the individuals to meet their responsibility.
Okay.
And I want the states to meet their responsibility.
Okay.
But I think there is also a national responsibility. The argument has been used against...
That's fair, right? And this is why I'm not a libertarian. There's some things that the government does need to take care of, even though I do think, in general, the government is in charge of too much.
Every piece of social legislation in the last 25 years. The people of the United States individually could not have developed the Tennessee Valley. Collectively, they could have. A cotton farmer in Georgia, or a peanut farmer, or a dairy farmer in Wisconsin or Minnesota, he cannot protect himself against the forces of supply and demand in the marketplace. But working together in effective governmental programs, he can do so. 17 million Americans who live over 65 on an average Social Security check of about $78 a month. They're not able to sustain themselves individually, but they can sustain themselves through the Social Security system.
I don't know. I'm going to say, we all know, I'm going to take my earbuds out here, because I took the trash out, but I forgot to put in new bags, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. But we all know that the Social Security system has kind of, is failing, right? Now, maybe it's because of mismanagement. I think the case for that can very easily be made. But I think one could also argue that Social Security as a concept is just not, at least Social Security how it exists today, was not ever something that was going to be able to sustain itself indefinitely. Because you can't just have an infinite baby basket for adults and expect that to work all the time, especially when your population is growing exponentially and inflation grows as well. Now, granted, our population isn't growing like that anymore, but I think it's still a fair criticism.
I believe in big government, but I believe in effective governmental action. And I think that's the only way that the United States is going to maintain its freedom. It's the only way that we're going to move ahead. I think we can do a better job. I think we're going to have to do a better job if we are going to meet the responsibilities which time and events have placed upon us. We cannot turn the job over to anyone else. If the United States fails, then the whole cause of freedom fails. And I think it depends in great measure on what we do here in this country. The reason Franklin Roosevelt was a good neighbor in Latin America was because he was a good neighbor in the United States. Because they felt that the American society was moving again. I want us to recapture that image. I want people in Latin America and Africa and Asia to start to look to America, to see how we're doing things, to wonder what the President of the United States is doing, and not to look at Khrushchev or look at the Chinese communists. That is the obligation of...
Hey, what group right now is looking to the Chinese communists for how we should enact policy? There are two people right now, two very prominent people, two prominent groups. That's the Democrat Party and Tucker Carlson.
Upon our generation. In 1933, Franklin Roosevelt said in his inaugural that this generation of Americans has a rendezvous with destiny. I think our generation of Americans has the same rendezvous. The question now is, can freedom be maintained under the most severe attack it has ever known? I think it can be. And I think in the final analysis, it depends upon what we do here. I think it's time America started moving again.
And now
it feels so weird to watch presidential debates that don't have applause. That's honestly kind of throwing me off. Now it's great.
I was gonna say Tucker Carlson.
Now it's great that there isn't that as much applause, because this makes what could be a 1 minute and 40 long debate a 58-minute long debate. But yeah, this is it's definitely a different feel than most modern debates that you see.
Opening statement by Vice President Richard M. Nixon.
Smith, Senator Kennedy. The things that Senator Kennedy has said, many of us can agree with.
And that's kind of what I said, right? Anyone can look at the country and be like, oh, there's bad stuff happening here. But what are your solutions? That's the thing. The only solution he gave, really, was saying that the government should be balanced and then proposing Social Security, which I think we all kind of know is a failing government program at the moment. He didn't really give us a lot to work with.
There is no question but that we cannot discuss our internal affairs in the United States without recognizing that they have a tremendous bearing on our international position. There is no question but that this nation cannot stand still, because we are in a deadly competition, a competition not only with the men in the Kremlin, but the men in Peking. We're ahead in this competition, as Senator Kennedy, I think, has implied. But when you're in a race, the only way to stay ahead is to move ahead. And I subscribe completely to the spirit that Senator Kennedy has expressed tonight.
It's hard to disagree, right? And I think that maybe there's something that modern politicians can learn from both of these men's statements, right? Which is that, hey, there are good things about the country, let's make the country better. Rather than saying that the country is terrible at its core, Or that, like, I don't know, our country is, like, and completely morally bankrupt, which, I mean, there are certainly some ways in which the country is sort of, not morally correct as far as what we believe as a whole, but
Said in the chat.
if you're trying to appeal to the majority of people, if you're trying to encourage the country to improve, you shouldn't beat them down. Sound our candidate's supposed to introduce solutions in their opening statement. That's a good question, actually. I think many do nowadays, but I don't know if they're supposed to. That's a good question. It's a good question.
The spirit that the United States should move ahead. Where then do we disagree? I think we disagree on the implication of his remarks tonight and on the statements that he has made on many occasions during his campaign to the effect that the United States has been standing still. We heard tonight, for example, the statement made that our growth in national product last year was the lowest of any industrial nation in the world. Now, last year, of course, was 1958. That happened to be a recession year. But when we look at the growth of GNP this year, a year of recovery, we find that it's 6 9/10% and one of the highest in the world today. More about that later. Looking then to this problem of how the United States should move ahead and where the United States is moving, I think it is well that we take the advice of a very famous campaigner. Let's look at the record. Is the United States standing still? Is it true that this administration, as Senator Kennedy has charged, has been an administration of retreat, of defeat, of stagnation? Is it true that, as far as this country is concerned, in the field of electric power, in all the fields that he has mentioned, we have not been moving ahead? Well, we have a comparison that we can make. We have the record of the Truman administration of 7.5 years and the 7.5 years of the Eisenhower administration. When we compare these two records...
Dude looks like he's supposed to be like, hold up, wait, what? Now, I don't know too much about the Truman administration, but I think that, Kennedy's reaction here tells at least the tale, if not a paragraph. Tells at least a paragraph, if not the whole tale.
We have the record of the Truman administration of 7.5 years and the 7.5 years of the Eisenhower administration.
He's like, hold up, wait, what?
When we compare these two records of the Eisenhower administration, when we compare these two records in the areas that Senator Kennedy has discussed tonight, I think we find that America has been moving ahead. Let's take schools. We have built more schools in these last 7.5 years than we built in the previous 7.5, for that matter, in the previous 20 years. Let's take hydroelectric power. We have developed more hydroelectric power.
Wait a second. Okay. He does not address his JFK's actual concerns here, but it's really great because it's like, it is a red herring, functions as a red herring, but it's adjacent, right? So
America has been moving ahead. Let's
Ism.
take schools.
Said
we
in
have
the
built
chat.
more schools in these
Classic
last 7.5
Kennedy
years
W.
than we built in the previous 7.5, for that matter, in the previous 20 years.
So what he's saying here is that the country has built more schools in the past 7.5 years than the previous 7.5 years and the previous 20 years. The problem with him making the statement is that this is a complete misdirection. JFK was not saying that we don't have enough schools. What JFK was saying was that teachers aren't being paid enough, and kind of like the economy is to a point where kids are are having to use their school lunches to feed their families. But JFK never complained about how many schools there were. He was just complaining about teacher pay. I think it was like one of his main complaint there.
Let's take hydroelectric power. We have developed more hydroelectric power in these 7.5 years than was developed in any previous administration in history.
JFK never said anything about hydroelectric power. He never said anything about hydroelectric power. He said something about like steel plants. So I don't even know what criticism this addresses.
Let us take hospitals. We find that more have been built in this administration than in the previous administration. The same is true of highways. Let's put it in terms that all of us can understand. We often hear...
That's like celebrating low unemployment when wages are also low. Like, that's like if JFK was like, hey, yo, it really sucks that people now, the American middle class family is earning less now than they were 5 years ago. But then, Nixon came up and said, "Well, there's never been a lower unemployment rate." Completely irrelevant, because that's not entirely the point.
National product discussed, and in that respect, may I say that when we compare the growth in this administration with that of the previous administration, that then
said in the chat, I think these are just Nixon's proposals.
These aren't Nixon's proposals necessarily, but at the time, it says here, Nixon was the Republican vice president. So what he's saying here is that basically he's not putting forth specific proposals, but he's kind of saying, hey, the guy who's like the superhero that I was the sidekick of, he was doing a good job. Why don't we just keep on doing what he was doing? That's kind of what he's saying. He's not directly offering proposals, but I think he's saying let's keep on doing what we were doing before. I think that's it.
Total growth of 11% over 7 years. In this administration, there's been a total growth of 19% over 7 years. That shows that there's been more growth in this administration than in its predecessor. But let's not put it there. Let's put it in terms of the average family. What has happened to you? We find that your wages have gone up 5 times as much in the Eisenhower administration as they did in the Truman administration. What about the prices?
Does that account for inflation? What if we compared the rate of inflation, the rate of wage increases to the increasing rate of inflation?
We find that the prices you pay went up 5 times as much in the Truman administration as they did in the Eisenhower administration. What's the net result of this? This means that
nice, by the way, that writing notes during the debate was something that was a staple in the original debate format, because that's something that candidates do now.
As they did in the Eisenhower administration. What's the net result of this? This means that the average family income went up 15% in the Eisenhower years as against 2% in the Truman years. Now, this is not standing still. But good as this record is, may I emphasize, it isn't enough. A record is never something to stand on. It's something to build on.
Good.
Building on this record, I believe that we have the secret for progress. We know the way to progress. And I think, first of all, our own record proves that we know the way. Senator Kennedy has suggested that he believes he knows the way. I respect the sincerity with which he makes that suggestion. But on the other hand, when we look at the various programs that he offers, they do not seem to be new.
Oh, okay, and maybe this is why now Nixon's going gloves off here. Maybe he's about to expose why it is that JFK was so shy about mentioning proposals in his opening statement.
Seem to be simply retreads of the programs of the Truman administration which preceded it. And I would suggest that during the course of the evening, he might indicate those areas in which his programs are new, where they will mean more progress than we had then. What kind of programs are we for? We are for programs that will expand educational opportunities, that will give to all Americans their equal chance for education, for all of the things which are necessary and dear to the hearts of our people. We are for programs, in addition, which will see that our medical care for the aged is much better handled than it is at the present time. Here again.
What was that? Was that a Joe Biden? You just pull a Joe Biden?
Necessary and dear to the hearts of our people. We are for programs, in addition, which will see that our medical care for the aged is much better handled than it is at the present time.
Okay, I can understand what you're saying there.
May I indicate that Senator Kennedy and I are not in disagreement as to the aim. We both want to help the old people. We want to see that they do have adequate medical care. The question is the means.
Exactly. Nobody disagrees on wanting to do the same thing.
We'll reach that goal better than the means that he advocates. I could give better examples, but for whatever it is, whether it's in the field of housing or health,
is he drooling?
Medical care.
You guys see the sweat underneath his bottom lip? What is that?
I advocate we'll reach that goal better than the means that he advocates.
I can't be the only one seeing this. What's up with this? Why is his lower lip glistening? That doesn't seem natural to me.
To give better examples,
Unless you forgot how to swallow.
whatever it is, whether it's in the field of housing or health or medical care or schools or the development of electric power, we have programs which we believe will move America, move her forward and build on the wonderful record that we have made over these past 7.5 years. Now, when we look at these programs, might I suggest that in evaluating them, we often have a tendency to say that the test of a program is how much you're spending. I will concede that in all the areas to which I have referred, Senator Kennedy would have the federal government spend more than I would have it spend. I costed out the cost of the Democratic platform. It runs a minimum of $13.2 billion a year more than we are presently spending to a maximum of $18 billion a year more than we're presently spending. Now, the Republican platform will cost more, too. It will cost a minimum of $4 billion a year more, a maximum of $4.9 billion a year more than we're presently spending. Now, does this mean that his program is better than ours? Because it isn't a question of how much the federal government spends.
Exactly.
It isn't a question of which
Ism.
government does the most.
Said in the chat.
Exactly.
Calling a Joe Biden when you start making a statement, and then realize you've worded it wrong, and then quickly backtrack and reword to finish your statement?
No, he actually didn't reword what he said. He actually skipped a word, which is I think like the advanced in age is like the phrase that he skipped. He paused, lost his spot and what he was saying, and then picked up what he was saying. But I do agree with Nixon here, and I think that he makes a good point that people don't necessarily put into perspective when looking at modern policy positions when it comes to welfare, which is that you can't just spend your way out of problems, right? You can't just throw enough money to make a bridge from where you are to where you need to be. So just because you're spending more money, that doesn't mean that your policies are better or they're going to help people more.
Ours? Not at all. Because it isn't a question of how much the federal government spends. It isn't a question of which government does the most. It's a question of which administration does the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in our case, I do believe that our programs will stimulate the creative energies of 180 million free Americans. I believe the programs that Senator Kennedy advocates will have a tendency to stifle those creative energies. I believe in other programs would lead to the stagnation of the motive.
This guy's going to have to explain why in the world. Oh, hey. What's smoke?
Are you live?
Oh, yeah, I'm live. I'm reacting to the first ever presidential. Yeah. I'm reacting to the first ever televised presidential debate.
Oh, okay.
Now, he's going to have to explain why it is that all of the steel mills are shut down if he's saying that there are, private interests and enterprises that are being stifled. Or if he's saying that JFK wants to stifle those things with his policies. So is he saying that he wants the mills to go from like 50% production to like 30? Because if he did, I don't think he would bring that up.
I believe, in other words, that his programs would lead to the stagnation of the motive power that we need in this country to get progress. The final point that I would like to make is this. Senator Kennedy has suggested in his speeches that we lack compassion for the poor, for the old, and for others that are unfortunate.
I guess he did insinuate that.
I understand throughout this campaign that his motives and mine are sincere. I know what it is.
Where do you see this in modern politics, right? Nixon is out here saying JFK wants to do the right thing. And he's not wrong. Most politicians do technically want to do what is best for the country. They just disagree on how. And there should be more acknowledgement of that in modern politics today.
It means to be poor. I know what it means to see people who are unemployed. I know Senator Kennedy feels as deeply about these problems as I do. But our disagreement is not about the goals for America, but only about the means to reach those goals.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. That completes.
No, I think there were some weak moments in this, but I think that his address here, in large part, was very, very good. I care mostly about policy, right? JFK provided rhetoric, which was nice. Nixon provided some rhetoric that was a bit weaker and not as inspiring, but he also provided some actual policies, which I think are actually more, well, maybe not policies, but he just pointed to records and said, hey, this policy has been more effective than this policy, or these. No, he was saying that this president's policies have been more effective than this president's policies. So let's lean more into the policies of the presidents who have actually been successful.
It's the opening statements, and now the candidates will answer questions or comment upon one another's answers to questions put by correspondents of the networks.
Now, from what I've read, I don't know if it was in this description, but this should be the section where the format's very, very different from how modern debates are done, except maybe those old YouTube debates.
The correspondent.
I'm Sander Van Oker, NBC News. I'm Charles.
Yo, they're breaking the fourth wall. What is this? I've never seen anything like this before.
There's answers to questions put by correspondents of the networks. The correspondent.
I'm Sander
The way that they turn, I guess nowadays you would expect the camera to just be trained on their faces. That's interesting.
Van Oker, NBC News. I'm Charles Warren, Mutual News.
Said in the chat.
I'm Stuart Nolan.
My God, is
CBS
this
News.
debate good?
I know,
This
right?
is how politicians should talk.
This is crazy.
Charles Warren, Mutual News. I'm Stuart Nolan. CBS.
Mutual. I don't know if you guys know much about the history of radio. I dug into the history of radio a bit when I was a big fan of old-time radio. So basically, this was the era of radio. Television still hadn't really like boomed yet. I guess is evidenced by the fact that this is the first ever televised presidential debate. Fox is the only broadcast channel today that didn't exist back then. So in the radio, there was this network called Mutual. I think it was Mutual Broadcasting System. And they ended up becoming, in the television era, what Fox is today. So Mutual, when you see Mutual here, basically think broadcast Fox.
I'm Sander Van Oker, NBC News. I'm Charles Warren, Mutual News. I'm Stuart Novin, CBS News.
Bob Fleming, ABC News. The first question to Senator Kennedy from Mr. Fleming.
Senator, the vice president in his campaign has said that you are naive and at times immature. He has raised the question of leadership. On this issue, why do you think people should vote for you rather than the vice president?
The vice president and I came to the Congress together. 1946, we both served in the Labor Committee. I've been there now for 14 years, the same period of time that he has. So that our experience in government is...
Why do you tell him? If he could have just sat there the whole time, then why did he make him stand up? Because apparently they have lavalier mics or boom mics that are picking up all the audio in the room. I guess he didn't technically need to stand up, but I do agree for presentation's sake, it was better for him to stand.
Said in the chat,
in the Labor Committee.
If you had a color TV in 1960, you were loaded.
Yeah, and I don't think this was broadcast in color, which is why some people really kind of dismissed Nixon's performance here, because he wore a color suit, I believe, and it just didn't work well with the black and white. You really, if you want like items or especially things to be distinguishable among color, you need high contrast, not variation in hue.
1946.
So basically, the background could have been blue and Nixon's suit could have been orange, but it still comes out similar because it's black and white.
Served in the Labor Committee. I've been there now for 14 years, the same period of time that he has. So that our experience in government is comparable. Secondly, I think the question is, what are the programs that we advocate? What is the party record that we lead? I come out of the Democratic Party, which in this century has produced Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman. And
not a fan of FDR. Not a fan of FDR. He is responsible for the welfare state as we know it today. So I'm just going to say that.
Which supported and sustained these programs, which I've discussed tonight. Mr. Nixon comes out of the Republican Party. He was nominated by it. And it is a fact that through most of these last 25 years, the Republican leadership has opposed federal aid for education, medical care for the aged, development of the Tennessee Valley, development of our natural resources. I think Mr. Nixon is...
The Republicans were against the development of natural resources, that's quite a that's a blatant party flip from where we stand today.
As an effective leader of his party, I hope he would grant me the same. The question before us is, which point of view and which party do we want to lead the United States?
Mr. Nixon, would you like to comment on that statement?
I have no comment.
The next question, Mr. Novin.
It's a nice change of pace from
Is
nowadays when pretty much there would
Said in the
always
In
be some sort of rebuttal.
1964, on 2% of American homes had a color TV.
Yeah, I don't think you had much color television content until the late 1960s, right? Like my favorite like really classic show that aired in 1969 is Mission Impossible, which was in color. But I don't think that there were many color shows, before like that time period.
Mr. Vice President, your campaign stresses the value of your 8-year experience. And the question arises as to whether that experience was as an observer or as a participant or as an initiator of policy making. Would you tell us, please, specifically what major proposals you have made in the last 8 years that have been adopted by the administration?
So basically, he's kind of saying how much the president's policies have been influenced by you. Are you actually as politically aligned with the previous administration as you're making yourself out to be?
It'd be rather difficult to cover them in 2.5 minutes. I would suggest that these proposals could be mentioned. First, after each of my foreign trips, I have made recommendations that have been adopted. For example, after my first trip abroad, I strongly recommended that we increase our exchange programs, particularly as they related to exchange of persons, of leaders in the labor field and in the information field. After my trip to South America, I made recommendations that a separate inter-American lending agency be set up, which the South American nations would like much better than to participate in the lending agencies which treated all the countries of the world the same. I have made other recommendations after each of the other trips. For example, after my trip abroad to Hungary, I made some recommendations with regard to the Hungarian refugee situation, which were adopted not only by the president, but some of them were enacted into law by the Congress. Within the administration, as a chairman of the President's Committee on Price Stability and Economic Growth, I have had the opportunity to make recommendations which have been adopted within the administration and which I think have been reasonably effective. I know Senator Kennedy suggested in a speech at Cleveland yesterday that committee had not been particularly effective. I would only suggest that while we do not take the credit for it, I would not presume to, that since that committee has been formed, the price line has been held very well within the United States.
So he's arguing that his policies have kind of led to a great economy, but isn't he like kind of incumbent, right? His status there is vice president, not former vice president. So I'm presuming that here, this is just coming out of, what is it, the Eisenhower presidency, I guess. He's kind of acting like his policies have led to economic growth, but yet they're in an economic downturn at this point. So
very well within the United States.
Well, I would say in the latter and that's what I found somewhat unsatisfactory about the figures, Mr. Nixon, that you used in your previous speech. When you talked about the Truman administration, Mr. Truman came to office in 1944 and at the end of the war, and difficulties that were facing the United States during that period of transition, 1946, when price controls were lifted. So it's rather difficult to use an overall figure of taking those 7.5 years and comparing them to the last 8 years. I'd prefer to take the overall percentage record of the last 20 years of the Democrats and the 8 years of the Republicans to show an overall period of growth. In regard to price stability, I'm not aware that committee did produce recommendations that ever were certainly before the Congress from the point of view of legislation in regard to controlling prices. In regard to the exchange of students, of labor unions, I am chairman of the Subcommittee on Africa, and I think that one of the most unfortunate phases of our policy towards that country was the very minute number of exchanges that we had. I think it's true of Latin America also. We did come forward with a program of students for the Congo of over 300, which was more than the federal government had for all of Africa the previous year. So that I don't think that we have moved, at least in those two areas, with sufficient vigor.
The next
Interesting.
question
I think that was really smart of him to point out that, perhaps Nixon was kind of cherry picking, which Democratic term he wanted to compare himself to.
Senator Kennedy from Mr. Warren.
Senator Kennedy, during your brief speech a few minutes ago, you mentioned farm surpluses. I'd like to ask this. It's a fact, I think, that presidential candidates traditionally make promises to farmers. Lots of people, I think, don't understand why the government pays farmers for not producing certain crops. Or
one thing I'm really noticing about the atmosphere of this is devoid of citizens. Everyone here is a member of the press. The entire audience is made out of press members, and then you have, your debate moderator. It's pretty different atmospherically from debates that we see today.
paying farmers if they overproduce, for that matter. Now, let me ask, sir, why can't the farmer operate like the businessman who operates a factory? If an auto company overproduces a certain model car, Uncle Sam doesn't step in and buy up the surplus. Why this constant courting of the farmer?
Well, because I think...
Oh, so what is he? Wait. Is he proposing that people who overproduce food because it rots, if you don't, if you can't sell it, is he arguing that the government should take it and give it to somebody else? That is madness. That's madness. It's absolute madness. And that reporter is making a good point, saying, that doesn't really make sense when you extrapolate that same principle across the board.
I think that if the federal government moved out of the program and withdrew its support, then I think you would have complete economic chaos. The farmer plants in the spring and harvests in the fall. There are hundreds of thousands of them. They're not able to control their market very well. They bring their crops in or their livestock in, many of them about the same time. They have only a few purchasers that buy their milk or their hogs, few large companies in many cases, and therefore the farmer is not in a position to bargain very effectively in the marketplace. I think...
Good point. It's important to remember that this came before a lot of really advanced methods appeared that can be used nowadays to preserve food and produce.
The experience of the 20s has shown what a free market could do to agriculture. And if the agricultural economy collapses, then the economy of the rest of the United States sooner or later will collapse. The farmers are the number one market for the automobile industry of the United States. The automobile industry is the number one market for steel. So if the farmer's economy continues to decline as sharply as it has in recent years, then I think you would have a recession in the rest of the country. So I think the case for the government intervention is a good one. Secondly, my objection to present farm policy is that there are no effective controls to bring supply and demand into better balance. The dropping of the support price in order to limit production has not worked. And we now have the highest surpluses, $9 billion worth. We've had a higher tax load from the Treasury for the farmer in the last few years with the lowest farm income in many years. I think that this farm policy has failed. And my judgment, the only policy that will work will be for effective supply and demand to be in balance. And that can only be done through governmental action.
No. These guys don't understand. First of all, a lot of times recessions are just economic corrections for overvaluation of particular goods, or an overwhelming supply of money, into the economy. There's that as well. So there's that aspect of things. Generally, if a economic depression is just a correction, then what you need to do is just allow the market to correct itself. And usually your economic depression or downturn will last maybe only 1 or 2 years. But then when you try to put in a bunch of government controls, that tends to make things worse for a longer period of time. And then that's when you see them last 5, 6, 7 years. When you have the government kind of putting their grubby fingers into things that the markets will naturally solve on their own. A lot of agricultural technology we have today didn't exist in 1960. Exactly, yeah. So JFK is kind of right when he's talking about the effects of how things are working currently. The food just goes bad after a certain amount of time. That's just how things happen.
I therefore suggest that in those basic commodities which are supported, that the federal government, after endorsement by the farmers in that commodity, attempt to bring supply and demand into balance, attempt effective production controls, so we won't have that 5 or 6% surplus which breaks the price 15 or 20%. I think Mr. Benson's program has failed. And I must say, after reading the Vice President's speech before the farmers as he read mine, I don't believe that it's very much different from Mr. Benson. I don't think it provides effective governmental controls. I think the support prices...
Also, a lot of this comes out of impatience for change, because I think that there's an assumption that everything needs to happen now, right? The economy needs to be fixed now. Not much of a long-term perspective on these things, right? Sometimes you have to wait for the market to correct itself. JFK and others, have, a freedom, a liberty to be upset that the economy is not doing well today. But that doesn't mean that you have to rush, the economic recovery that will inevitably show up.
...are tied to the average market price of the last 3 years, which was Mr. Benson's theory. I therefore do not believe that this is a sharp enough breach with the past to give us any hope of success for the future.
Mr. Nixon, comment?
I, of course, disagree with Senator Kennedy insofar as his suggestion as to what should be done on the farm program. He has made the suggestion that what we need is to move in the direction of more government controls, a suggestion that would also mean raising prices that the consumers pay for products and imposing upon the farmers controls on acreage even far more than they have today. I think this is the wrong...
More than there are today. So he's saying that there are controls in place right now. Maybe that's the cause of the economic downturn they're experiencing. Could be. Could also be a byproduct that throws a Band-Aid on the economic downturn.
Wrong direction. I don't think this has worked in the past. I do not think it will work in the future. The program that I have advocated is one which departs from the present program that we have in this respect. It recognizes that the government has a responsibility to get the farmer out of the trouble he presently is in because the government got him into it. And that's the fundamental reason why we can't let the farmer go by himself at the present time. The farmer produced these surpluses because the government asked him to through legislation during the war.
Yo! He's gonna put in the government on blast. He's not wrong. He's not wrong there, right? So maybe if the government didn't tell him to make too much, then they wouldn't have made too much.
Now that we have these surpluses, it's our responsibility to indemnify the farmer during that period that we get rid of the surplus. Until we get the surpluses off the farmer's back, however, we should have a program, such as I announced, which will see that farm income holds up. But I would...
So here, it kind of sounds like what he's saying is basically compensating the farmers for producing more than they should have because the government told them to. And also making this is an important thing, right? Making this a limited time policy rather than like an indefinite policy, which a lot of welfare programs tend to be indefinite. Now, granted, things become slippery slopes. I wouldn't be surprised if he, I don't know, I can't remember if he won this election or not, but if he won, imagine him putting this thing into like practice. It's supposed to happen for just one fall in the last 3 years. That's completely realistic. It's realistic that would occur, unfortunately. But at the heart of what he's saying, it sounds good to me, right? If the government, messed things up in the first place, they should be the ones to fix it.
Propose holding that income up, not through a type of program that Senator Kennedy has suggested that would raise prices, but one that would indemnify the farmer, pay the farmer in kind from the products which are in surplus.
The next question to Vice President Nixon from Mr. Van Oker.
Mr. Vice President, since the question of executive leadership is a very important campaign issue, I'd like to follow Mr. Novin's question. Now, Republican campaign slogans, you see them on signs around the country, as we did last week, say, it's experience that counts. That's over a picture of yourself, sir, implying that you've had more governmental executive decision-making experience than your opponent. Now, in his news conference on August 24th, President Eisenhower was asked to give one example of a major idea of yours that he adopted. His reply was, and I'm quoting, "If you give me a week, I might think of one. I don't remember." Now, that was a month ago, sir, and the president hasn't brought it up since. And I'm wondering, sir, if you can clarify which
version is correct, the one put out by Republican campaign leaders or the one put out by President Eisenhower?
Well, I would suggest, Mr. Van Oker, that the president, that was probably a facetious remark. I would also suggest that insofar as his statement is concerned, that I think it would be improper for the President of the United States to disclose the instances in which members of his official family had made recommendations, as I have made them through the years, to him, which he has accepted or rejected.
Interesting.
The President has always made...
I think maybe it's because that could influence how people interact with his family, right? People could be like, hey, yo, tell the president to do this, tell the president to do that. That is kind of what happened with FDR, actually. Now, FDR kind of went out and sought out this sort of...
Nixon won the 1968
He kind of went out and sought out advice about these sorts of things. But she kind of went out and hung out with a bunch of poor people and was like, maybe my husband should just like give everyone everything. And then like she went to FDR and FDR was like, oh yeah, sounds right. And so it was really FDR's wife that caused FDR to create the welfare state. So I think that maybe that's kind of what he's trying to fall out of, and making sure that people don't hound his family members with political advice, and kind of just like lets them be.
Maintained, and very properly so, that he is entitled to get what advice he wants from his cabinet and from his other advisors without disclosing that to anybody, including, as a matter of fact, to Congress. Now, I can only say this. Through the years, I have sat in the National Security Council. I have been in the cabinet. I have met with the legislative leaders. I have met with the president when he made the great decisions with regard to Lebanon, Timoy Matsu, other matters.
I should point out what some said in the chat. JFK won the 1960 election. Nixon won the 1968 election.
The president has asked for my advice. I have given it. Sometimes my advice has been taken. Sometimes it is not. I do not say that I have made the decision. And I would say that no president should ever allow anybody else to make the major decision.
I just noticed that his lip cleared up. So I did think there was some sort of time jump, maybe a commercial break in between the first segment and the second segment. So maybe he cleaned up his lip.
The president only makes the decision. All that his advisors do is to give counsel when he asks for it. As far as what experience counts and whether that is experience that counts, that isn't for me to say. I can only say that my experience is there for the people to consider. Senator Kennedy's is there for the people to consider. He pointed out we came to the Congress in the same year. His experience has been different from mine. Mine has been in the executive branch. His has been in the legislative branch. I would say that the people now have the opportunity to evaluate his as against mine.
White balance is kind of struggling on this.
And I think both he and I are going to abide by whatever the people decide.
Senator Kennedy?
Well, I'll just say that the question is of experience, and the question also is what our judgment is of the future, and what our goals are for the United States, and what ability we have to implement those goals. Abraham Lincoln came to the presidency in 1860 after a rather little-known session in the House of Representatives, and after being defeated for the Senate in 58 and was a distinguished president. There's no certain road to the presidency. There are no guarantees that if you take one road or another that you will be a successful president.
To be fair, one could, very reasonably by the way, make the assumption that the less political experience you have, the worst president you will be. Doesn't necessarily like make it, universally true, but it is a fair assumption that one could make.
I have been in the Congress for 14 years. I have voted in the last 8 years. The Vice President was presiding over the Senate and meeting his other responsibilities. I have met decisions over 800 times on matters which affect not only the domestic security of the United States, but as a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The question really is, which candidate and which party can meet the problems that the United States is going to face in the 60s?
The next question to Senator Kennedy from Mr. Noble.
Senator Kennedy, in connection with these problems of the future that you speak of and the program that you enunciated earlier in your direct talk, you call for expanding some of the welfare programs for schools, for teacher salaries, medical care, and so forth, but you also call for reducing the federal debt. And I'm wondering how you, if you're president in January, would go about paying the bill for all this.
How it seems so strange to see a presidential candidate who is a Democrat call for lowering the national debt, but also on top of that, also be trying to tout all of these government spending programs that will, I mean, kind of like the reporter is saying there, is going to increase the national debt or go against, whatever, national debt cutting measures one might want to put into place.
I did not advocate reducing the federal debt because I don't believe that you're going to be able to reduce the federal debt very much in 1961, 2, or 3.
Okay, there. That's an honest take there. Makes a lot more sense. I couldn't imagine this dude out here trying to say like, yo, we need to reduce the debt. Hey, why don't we spend $4 billion on our economy?
You have heavy obligations which affect our security, which we're going to have to meet. And therefore, I've never suggested we should be able to retire the debt substantially or even at all in 1961 or 2.
Senator, I believe in one of your speeches you suggested that reducing the interest rate would help toward...
No, not reducing the interest. Reducing the interest rate, in my judgment, the hard money, tight money policy, fiscal policy of this administration has contributed to the slowdown in our economy, which helped bring the recession of 54, which made the recession of 58 rather intense, and which has slowed somewhat our economic activity in 1960. What I have talked about, however, the kind of programs that I talked about, in my judgment, are fiscally sound. Medical care for the aged, I would put under Social Security. The Vice President and I disagree on this. The program, the Javits-Nixon or the Nixon-Javits program, would have cost, if fully used, $600 million by the government per year and $600 million by the state. The program which I advocated, which failed by 5 votes in the United States Senate, would have put medical care for the aged in Social Security and would have been paid for through the Social Security system and the Social Security tax.
But wouldn't that mean that you would have to spend more on Social Security system than usual, right? He's acting as if you can just pass the bill over to the Social Security program and that bill just doesn't exist anymore? And that contributes to the failing of the Social Security system. Because I think this is something that's happened before where people just take out of the Social Security pot. And then you wonder why that money isn't there. Like, what?
I support federal aid to education and federal aid for teachers' salaries. I think that's a good investment. I think we're going to have to do it. And I think to heap the burden further on the property tax, which is already strained in many of our communities, will ensure, in my opinion, that many of our children will not be adequately educated and many of our teachers not adequately compensated. There is no greater return to an economy or to a society than an educational system second to none. On the question of the development of natural resources, I would pay as you go, in the sense that they would be balanced and the power revenues would bring back sufficient money to finance the projects.
He's not saying how... Yo, this is so vague. He's not saying how... He's saying, oh, it would be balanced. We would pay as we go. How are you balanced, man? Like, how are you going to actually... Dude asked, how are you going to pay for this? He said we would pay for it in a balanced way as we go. That's the farthest thing away from being, from clarifying and explaining how you're actually gonna pay for it.
The same way as the Tennessee Valley. I believe in the balanced budget. And the only conditions under which I would unbalance the budget would be if there was a grave national emergency or a serious recession.
There are always grave national emergencies and recessions, right? He's about to say, oh, we are in a grave national emergency. We are in a depression.
Otherwise, with a steady rate of economic growth, and Mr. Nixon and Mr. Rockefeller in their meeting said a 5% economic growth would bring by 1962 $10 billion extra in tax revenue.
Like, there's this idea that we throw away we throw away good, long-standing political policy just because the economy is bad or the country is in dire straits. That's a terrible political philosophy. And for the life of me, I still don't understand why it's something that people continue to abide by. Oh shoot! Hold on. Did I mess up the scene there? Hold on, my bad. Wait a second. Sorry. There we go.
Whatever is brought in, I think that we can finance essential programs within a balanced budget if business remains orderly.
Yes, I think what Mr. Nova is referring to was not one of Senator Kennedy's speeches, but the Democratic platform. which did mention cutting the national debt. I think, too, that it should be pointed out that, of course, it is not possible, particularly under the proposals that Senator Kennedy has advocated, either to cut the national debt or to reduce taxes. As a matter of fact, it will be necessary to raise taxes. As Senator Kennedy points out, that as far as his one proposal is concerned, the one for medical care for the aged, that would be financed out of Social Security. That, however, is raising taxes for those who pay Social Security. He points out that he would make pay-as-you-go be the basis for our natural resources development. For our natural resources development, which I also support incidentally, however, whenever you appropriate money for one of these projects, you have to pay now and appropriate the money, and while they eventually do pay out, it doesn't mean that the government doesn't have to put out the money this year. And so I would say that in all of these proposals Senator Kennedy has made, they will result in one of two things. Either he has to raise taxes or he has to unbalance the budget. If he unbalances the budget, that means you have inflation.
Mm-hmm.
That will be, of course, a very cruel blow to the very people, the older people that we've been talking about. As far as aid for school construction is concerned, I favor that, as Senator Kennedy did in January of this year, when he said he favored that rather than aid to teacher salaries. I favor that because I believe that's the best way.
Also, by the way, for any of you guys who are confused by Nixon's statement here, that if you increase your spending without increasing taxes, that causes inflation. That's because that will cause you have to spend the money, right? Even if you don't have it, so you print it, right? We all know that printing money causes inflation. What he's saying here is that accelerates the process of getting that money printed.
People, the older people that we've been talking about. As far as aid for school construction is concerned, I favor that, as Senator Kennedy did in January of this year, when he said he favored that rather than aid to teacher salaries. I favor that because I believe that's the best way to aid our schools without running any risk whatever of the federal government telling our teachers what to teach.
The next question to Vice President Nixon from Mr. Warren. Mr. Vice President, you mentioned schools. It was just yesterday. I think you asked for a crash program
said in the
to
chat.
raise education standards.
LOL, I think
And
it's
this evening
just
you
me
talked
who's
about
here.
Yeah, I think so too.
education. Mr. Vice President, you said it was back in 1957 that salaries paid to school teachers were nothing short of a national disgrace. Higher salaries for teachers, you added, were important, and if the situation wasn't corrected, it would lead to a national disaster. Yet you refused to vote in the Senate in order to break a tie vote when that single vote, if it had been yes, would have granted salary increases to teachers. I wonder if you could explain that.
Awfully glad you got that question because, as you know, I got into it at the last, and my other question wasn't able to complete the argument. I think that the reason that I voted against having the federal government pay teacher salaries was probably the very reason that concerned Senator Kennedy when in January of this year, in his kickoff press conference, he said that he favored aid for school construction, but at that time did not feel that there should be aid for teacher salaries.
Oh, okay.
That's the way I read his remarks. Now, why should there be any question about the federal government aiding teacher salaries? Why did Senator Kennedy take that position then? Why do I take it now? We both took it then, and I take it now for this reason. We want higher teacher salaries.
Yes.
We need higher teacher salaries. But we also want our education to be free of federal control. When the federal government gets the power to pay teachers, inevitably, in my opinion, it will acquire the power to set standards and to tell the teachers what to teach. I think this would be bad for the country. It would be bad for the teaching profession.
I wasn't even thinking about it from that perspective. I was thinking it from the perspective of if you set the government setting prices usually is a bad thing. It kind of artificially buoys the economy and also contributes to inflation because it will, if the government's setting wages, it'll set them higher than they are already. And then the entire economy will, over time, kind of chase that price until the inflation meets that new price that was set. Essentially, the wages will effectively increase, like temporarily for a time, but then the economy will adjust until once you account for the newfound inflation, they're basically being paid the same. And that's why you see minimum wages being enacted, and then they're constantly increasing because they're constantly chasing that inflation.
There is another point that should be made. I favor higher salaries for teachers. But as Senator Kennedy said in January of this year in the same press conference, the way that you get higher salaries for teachers is to support school construction, which means that all the local school districts in the various states then have money which is freed to raise the standards for teacher salaries. I should also point out this. Once you put the responsibility on the federal government for paying a portion of teacher salaries, your local communities and your state are not going to meet the responsibility as much as they should. I believe, in other words, that we have seen the local communities in the state assuming more of that responsibility. Teacher salaries,
said in the chat,
have gone up 50%
that is true
in the last 8 years, as against only a 34% rise for other salaries. This is not enough. It should be more. But I do not believe that the way to get more salaries for teachers is to have the federal government get in with a massive program. My objection here is not the cost in dollars. My objection here is the potential cost in controls and eventual freedom for the American people by giving the federal government power over education. And that is the greatest power a government can have.
I agree with this point here, but can we take a minute to both recognize that both of these candidates are speaking fairly eloquently, like off the rip. Like it sounds like they're reading written speeches. Well, they're not. They're pretty much just speaking off the cuff, and it's crazy. Politicians don't talk like this today.
Senator Kennedy's comment.
When the vice president quotes me in January 60, I do not believe the federal government should pay directly teachers' salaries, but that was not the issue before the Senate in February. The issue before the Senate was that the money would be given to the state. The state then could determine whether the money would be spent for school construction or teacher salaries. On that question...
Isn't that another red herring fallacy? Because here's the deal, man. If you said that you didn't think that teacher salary should be paid by the government, it doesn't matter whether or not the meeting was about paying teachers the salaries or not, whether that funding comes from the government or from the states. I mean, you said what you said. Just stand by what you said instead of trying to be like, oh, well, I mean, the thing was, we weren't talking about, paying the salaries of teachers at the time. It's irrelevant, man. It doesn't matter.
The vice president and I disagreed. I voted in favor.
Oh, hey, Lennox, so what's up?
And supported it strongly because I think that provided assistance to our teachers for their salaries without any
He's looking kind of terse. I think he's kind of also like, come on, man. You literally supported this policy. Why are you trying to backtrack now? And also say that you didn't support it in the way that you meant you supported when you said it, when you said that you supported the policy.
That provided assistance to our teachers for their salaries without any chance of federal control. And it is on that vote that Mr. Nixon and I disagreed, and his tie vote defeated. His breaking the tie defeated the proposal. I don't want the federal government paying teachers' salaries directly. But if the money will go to the states, and the states can then determine whether it shall go for school construction or for teachers' salaries, in my opinion, you protect the local authority over the school board and the school committee. And therefore, I think that was a sound proposal, and that is why I supported it, and I regret that it did not pass. Secondly, there have been statements made that the Democratic platform would cost a good deal of money, and that I'm in favor of unbalancing the budget. That is wholly wrong, wholly in error. And it is a fact that in the last 8 years...
This is not the question at hand. We're talking about paying the teachers. Why is he keep going back to this? This reminds me back when Marco Rubio said like 5 times in 3 minutes, like, let's dispel with this theory that Barack Obama doesn't know what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's doing. Like, this is kind of like, this reminds me of that moment, sort of.
Congress has reduced the request of the appropriation by over $10 billion. That is not my view, and I think it ought to be stated very clearly on the record. My view is that you can do these programs, and they should be carefully drawn within a balanced budget if our economy is moving ahead.
The next question.
I love how the dude keeps on saying, oh, we should balance the budget, and then also is constantly proposing indefinite, welfare policies that just keep on increasing the how much the government spends. And then that also naturally, of course, contributes to the national debt. Very cool, man. Poggers.
And to Senator Kennedy from Mr. Van Oker.
Senator, you've been promising the voters that if you are elected president, you'll try and push through Congress bills on medical aid to the aged, a comprehensive minimum hourly wage bill, federal aid to education. Now, in the August post-convention session of the Congress, when you
said in the chat,
the possibility you
the
could one day be
2016
president, when you had
Republican primary
overwhelming
debates
majorities,
were
especially in
wild.
the Senate,
They
you
were.
could not get action on these bills. Now, how do you feel that you'll be able to get them in January
Well, let's
if you
take
weren't
the
able
bill.
to get them in August?
If I may take the bills, we did pass in the Senate a bill to provide a $1.25 minimum wage. It failed because the House did not pass it, and the House failed by 11 votes. And I might say that 2/3 of the Republicans in the House voted against a $1.25 minimum wage, and a majority of the Democrats sustained it. Nearly 2/3 of them voted for the $1.25. We were threatened by a veto if we passed $1.25. It's extremely difficult, with the great power that the president does, to pass any bill when the president is opposing. All the president needs to sustain his veto.
That's true. I think in that time, I don't know if it's true if in that time, but typically you'll need a supermajority in the Senate, I think, to support the bill. That would counteract a president's veto.
Of any bill is 1/3 plus 1 in either the House or the Senate. Secondly, we passed a federal aid to education bill in the Senate. It failed to come to the floor of the House of Representatives. It was killed in the Rules Committee. And it is a fact in the August session that the 4 members of the Rules Committee who were Republicans, joining with 2 Democrats, voted against sending the aid to education bill to the floor of the House. 4 Democrats voted for it. Every Republican on the Rules Committee voted against sending that bill to be considered by the members of the House of Representatives. Thirdly, on medical care for the aged. This is the same fight that's been going on for 25 years in Social Security.
Oh, I guess they used the word aged instead of elderly. So, no, I think you were right back then when you said that that he had backtracked and like kind of and reworded what he said. He did say aged. And I thought you meant to say more words than that, though.
We wanted to tie it to Social Security. We offered an amendment to do so. 44 Democrats voted for it. 1 Republican voted for it. And we were informed at the time it came to a vote that if it was adopted, the President of the United States would veto it. In my judgment, a vigorous Democratic president, supported by a Democratic majority in the House and Senate, can win the support for these programs. But if you send a Republican president and a Democratic majority, and the threat of a veto hangs over the Congress, in my judgment, you will continue what happened in the August session, which is a clash of parties and inaction.
Mr. Nixon, comment?
Well, obviously, my views are a little different. First of all, I don't see how it's possible
Just a little bit.
a 1/3 of a body, such as the Republicans have in the House and the Senate, to stop 2/3 if the 2/3 are adequately led. I would say, too, that when Senator Kennedy refers to the action of the House Rules Committee, there are 8 Democrats on that committee and 4 Republicans. It would seem to me, again, that it is very difficult to blame the 4 Republicans for the 8 Democrats not getting something through that particular committee. I would say further that to blame the president and his veto power for the inability of the senator and his colleague to get action in this special session misses the mark. When the president exercises his veto power, he has to have the people behind him, not just a third of the Congress. Because let's consider it. If the majority of the members of the Congress felt that these particular proposals were good issues, majority of those who were Democrats, why didn't they pass them and send to the president and get a veto and have an issue? The reason why these particular bills in these various fields that have been mentioned were not passed was not because the president was against it. It was because the people were against it. It was because they were too extreme.
Interesting.
I'm convinced that the alternate proposal.
So basically, I think what he's saying, is the point that he's making here, is it that, like, hey, if these policies were so popular, why couldn't you pass it with supermajority that would counteract the veto? Is that the point he's making? I think it's the point he's making.
Proposals that I have, that the Republicans have in the field of health, in the field of education, in the field of welfare, because they are not extreme, because they will accomplish the end without too great cost in dollars or in freedom, that they could get through the next Congress.
The next question to Vice President Nixon from Mr.
Also, what's up with the perspective? The perspective is all screwed up. Look at how the dude on the left looks. I don't think he naturally looks that thin.
Plenty.
The proportions are all
I
off.
take it then you believe that you could work better with Democratic majorities in the House and Senate. And Senator Kennedy could work with Democratic majorities in the House and Senate.
I would say this, that we, of course, expect to pick up some seats in both in the House and the Senate. We would hope to control the House, to get a majority in the House in this election. We cannot, of course, control the Senate. I would say that a president will be able to lead. A president will be able to get his program through to the effect that he has the support of the country, the support of the people. Sometimes we get the opinion that in getting programs through the House or the Senate, it's purely a question of legislative finagling and all that sort of thing. It isn't really that. Whenever a majority of the people are for a program, the House and the Senate responds to it. And whether this House and Senate in the next session is Democratic or Republican, if the country will have voted for the candidate for the presidency and for the proposals that he has made, I believe that you will find that the president, if it were a Republican, as it would be in my case, would be able to get his program through that Congress. Now, I also say that as far as Senator Kennedy's proposals are concerned, that, again, the question is not simply one of a presidential veto stopping program. You must always remember that a president can't stop anything unless he has the people behind him. And the reason President Eisenhower's vetoes have been sustained...
I think if he's saying... I do think that he's being a little bit disingenuous if he's saying that, well, if there isn't, if the president vetoes something, then the people must be behind him. I think that the president can veto something that the majority of people want, but if it's something that's controversial, right, then there's not going to be enough support for the opposition, right? There's not going to be enough support for a supermajority that would overturn his veto. So I think that what he's saying is that, well, I mean, I know what he's saying. He's wrong, but it's a little bit more accurate to say that if these measures were so popular, then in among the people, right, then the majority of people would have voted in congressmen and senators that would have had the backing that would have created the supermajority necessary to counteract the president's veto. And what Nixon is saying here is basically, he's like, if you don't have a bill that is popular enough to get that supermajority in the Congress, then you can't complain about it not getting. You can't complain about the president being able to veto it, because he's like, if your policy was so good, then just make it be so appealing that the majority of congressmen would support. Now, they're here talking about a policy being popular, and that a popular policy isn't necessarily right. Something that's popular can be wrong. So I think it's a little bit besides the point to argue about how popular or unpopular a policy is.
The reason the Congress does not send up bills to him which they think will be vetoed is because the people and the Congress, a majority of them, know the country is behind the president.
Senator Kennedy? Well, now let's look at these bills that the vice president suggests were too extreme. One was a bill for $1.25 an hour for anyone who works in a store or a company that has $1 million a year business. I don't think that's extreme at all. And yet nearly...
Democrats never think they're extreme. But they usually tend to be like the most extreme people around, right? No one's going to be like, oh yeah, we think we're extreme. Like, who's going to say that they're extreme? Now, I don't know what the economy is like, right? But I think that kind of adding in more brackets and stuff for minimum wage is a bad idea.
One was a bill for $1.25 an hour for anyone who works in a store or a company that has $1 million a year business. I don't think that's extreme at all. And yet nearly 2/3 to 3/4 of the Republicans in the House of Representatives voted against that proposal. Secondly was the federal aid to education bill. It was a very, because of the defeat of teacher salaries, it was not a bill that met, in my opinion, the need. The fact of the matter is, it was a bill that was less than you recommended, Mr. Nixon, this morning in your proposal. It was not an extreme bill. And yet we could not get one Republican to join, at least I think 4
Ism.
of the 8 Democrats
Said
voted
in the
to send it to
chat.
the floor of the House, not one
Oh yeah.
Republican.
Also,
You're extreme.
oh yeah. But also another thing too that he is sort of doing is I feel like he's peppering his presentation here with red herring fallacies, because Nixon never said that his policies were extreme. He said they were unpopular. And those are two very different things. I wonder if Nixon is picking up that Kennedy is using a lot of red herring fallacies here.
And they joined with those Democrats who were opposed to it. I don't say the Democrats are united in their support of the program, but I do say a majority are, and I say a majority of the Republicans are opposed to it. The third is medical care for the aged, which is tied to Social Security, which is financed out of Social Security funds. Does not put a deficit on the Treasury. The proposal advanced by you and by Mr. Javits would have cost $600 million. Mr. Rockefeller rejected it in New York, said he didn't agree with the financing at all, said it ought to be on Social Security. So these are 3 programs which are quite moderate. I think it shows the difference between the 2 parties. One party is ready to move in these programs, the other party gives them lip service.
Mr. Warren's question for Senator Kennedy.
Senator Kennedy, on another subject, communism is so often described as an ideology or a belief that exists somewhere other than in the United States. Let me ask you, sir, just how serious a threat to our national security are these communist subversive activities in the United States today?
Well, I think they're serious. I think it's a matter that we should continue.
Also, sorry for the sound. I think it's coming from some neighbors who are cutting the grass. I'm monitoring the levels, and I can see it's not enough that my compressor is cranking it all the way up, but I think it might be a little bit visible or a little bit audible. So if you guys hear the noise of someone cutting the grass and you're annoyed, I'm sorry. It's not me. I already cut the grass today.
Continue to give great care.
See, because I lowered my noise gate because I think it was a little bit aggressive. So yeah, that's why it's probably picking it up now.
Attention to. We should support the laws which the United States has passed in order to protect us from those who would destroy us from within. We should sustain the Department of Justice in its efforts and the FBI, and we should be continually alert. I think if the United States is maintaining a strong society...
Said in the chat. I can't hear the cutting the grass.
What did you hear? I mean, there was something being picked up by my levels. Maybe because my compressor wasn't picking it up. It just wasn't that you guys couldn't really hear it because it was like really low on like the levels. So maybe you guys just couldn't hear it. I see it visually here. I can't hear what you guys are hearing exactly.
That we should continue to give great care and attention to. We should support the laws which the United States has passed in order to protect us from those who would destroy us from within. We should sustain the Department of Justice in its efforts and the FBI, and we should be continually alert. I think if the United States is maintaining a strong society here in the United States, I think that we can meet any internal threat. The major threat is external and will continue.
Mr. Nixon, comment?
I agree with Senator Kennedy's appraisal generally in this respect. The question of communism within the United States has been one that has worried us in the past. It is one that will continue to be a problem for years to come.
Bro's a fortune teller. We got a fortune teller in the house, man.
We have to remember that the Cold War that Mr. Khrushchev is waging and his colleagues are waging is waged all over the world, and it's waged right here in the United States. That's why we have to continue to be alert. It is also essential in being alert that we be fair. Fair because by being fair, we uphold the very freedoms that the communists would destroy. We uphold the standards of conduct which they would never follow. And in this connection, I think that
I think that being like communists are unfair might not be the strongest case you could make against communism. Now, granted, he's not wrong, but I do think that like if the go-to like opposition to communism, at least nowadays, maybe it's different, isn't that, oh, the communists are unfair. I think that the most compelling argument against communism is that communism always leads to oppression and persecution. You don't see a communist country that doesn't oppress or persecute some people group within that country, whether that be based on ethnicity, whether it be based on ideology. There always is someone oppressed in a communist nation.
Must look to the future, having in mind the fact that we fight communism at home, not only by our laws to deal with communists, the few who do become communists and the few who do become fellow travelers.
There was that whole thing, and I did not like that era in American politics where basically treasonous laws were being used against people who became communists. Like, if America is such a free country, why aren't you letting people be communists? People should be able to believe whatever they want. So I was never a fan of that policy. I think a lot of that was like a Red Scare philosophy, which was rampant during this time period. Like I mentioned earlier, one of my favorite older TV shows was Mission Impossible, but that was all like a lot of like Cold War and Red Scare philosophy that kind of fueled that series.
We also fight communism at home by moving against those various injustices which exist in our society, which the communists feed upon. And in that connection, I again would say, while Senator Kennedy says we are for the status quo, I do believe that he would agree that I am just as sincere in believing that my proposals for federal aid to education, my proposals for health care are just as sincerely held as his. The question, again, is not one of goals. We're for those goals. It's one of means.
Mr. Van Oker's question for Vice President Nixon.
Mr. Vice President, in one of your earlier statements, you said, we've moved ahead, we've built more schools, we've built more hospitals. Now, sir, isn't it true that the building of more schools is a local matter for financing? Were you claiming that the Eisenhower administration was responsible for the building of these schools, or is it the local school districts that provide for them?
Not at all. As a matter of fact, your question brings out a point that I'm very glad to make. Too often, in appraising whether we are moving ahead or not, we think only of what the federal government is doing.
Yo! This dude is honestly pretty based. That's pretty much a summary of American politics today in a nutshell. It's good to have you newbie. It was good to have you in the chat, man. ISM. I have not heard like such a poignant critique of American politics when it comes to policy, which is that's a great point. A lot of people are around here like, if the government isn't doing anything, then there isn't any progress being made. Progress is not the government making a cradle for you. Progress is just the country moving forward. We've had an example, this current economy. Let's look back in the past 3 years, right? We're in a recession now, right? Don't care what Joe Biden has to say, but this didn't start with Joe Biden. Donald Trump had this guy in the Fed, I think, the Federal Reserve, whose policy was just printing money, printing more money, printing more money. Then Trump signed all the stimmy packages, right? He signed all the stimmies, which caused even more money to be printed. Then Joe Biden continued that policy. And then on top of that, typical Democrat policies, increasing the spending. This is not just Joe Biden's fault, but he, exponentially perpetuated and exacerbated the issue. And then also enacted policies just made the bad effects of the bad policies kick in. All of that to say, one would assume that we're, because as a nation, we're spending more money than we've ever spent before, and that we're making progress. Well, this progress has led to a recession. So you can't measure how much progress we're making as a country merely by how much we spend.
Now, that isn't the test of whether America moves. The test of whether America moves is whether the federal government, plus the state government, plus the local government, plus the biggest segment of all, individual enterprise, moves. We have, for example, a gross national product of approximately $500 billion. Roughly $100 billion to $125 billion of that is the result of government activity. $400 billion, approximately, is the result of what individuals do. Now, the reason the Eisenhower administration has moved, the reason that we've had the funds, for example, locally, to build the schools and the hospitals and the highways, to make the progress that we have, is because this administration has encouraged individual enterprise. And it has resulted in the greatest expansion of the private sector of the economy that has ever been witnessed in an 8-year period. And that is growth. That is the growth that we are looking for. It is the growth that this administration has supported and that its policies have stimulated.
Senator Kennedy?
Well, I must say, I think the reason that the schools have been constructed is because the local school districts were willing to increase the property taxes to a tremendously high figure, in my opinion, almost the point of diminishing returns, in order to sustain these schools.
Interesting.
Secondly, I think we have a rich country, and I think we have a powerful country. I think what we have to do, however, is have the president and the leadership set before our country exactly what we must do in the next decade if we're going to maintain our security.
Now, this dude, I talked about this in my political compass, thing that I did just before in this very same stream. This dude is basically saying that gridlock is bad. We're sick and tired of having these bills, sitting festering that could be passed if only the House and the Senate were controlled by the same people who were controlling the presidency. You don't always have to be passing bills all the time. It's a very short-sighted position to take to say, oh, the government will solve everything. The government's not going to solve everything. The government causes more problems than it fixes. Most solutions that the government creates are just the creation of new problems.
The development of natural resources. The Soviet Union is making great gains. It isn't enough to compare what might have been done 8 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, or 20 years ago. I want to compare what we're doing with what our adversaries are doing, so that by the year 1970, the United States is ahead in education, in health, in building, in homes, in economic strength. I think that's the big assignment, the big task, the big function of the federal government.
Can I have the summation time, please?
Summation time.
Completed our questions and our comments, and in just a moment we'll have the summation time.
Oh, nice.
This will allow 3 minutes and 20 seconds for the summation by each candidate.
Bro, what? They're like an otherworldly voice just descended from the clouds to say something about the time and the procedures of the debate.
3 minutes and 20 seconds for each candidate. Vice President Nixon, will you make the first summation?
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Senator Kennedy, first of all, I think it is well to put in perspective where we really do stand with regard to the Soviet Union in this whole matter of growth. The Soviet Union has been moving faster than we have, but the reason for that is obvious. They start from a much lower base. Although they have been moving faster in growth than we have, we find, for example, today, that their total gross national product is only 44% of our total gross national product. That's the same percentage that it was 20 years ago. And as far as the absolute gap is concerned, we find that the United States is even further ahead than it was 20 years ago. Is this any reason for complacency? Not at all. Because these are determined men. They're fanatical men. And we have to get the very most out of our economy. I agree with Senator Kennedy completely on that scope. Where we disagree is in the means that we would use to get the most out of our economy.
Exactly.
I respectfully submit that Senator Kennedy too often would rely too much on the federal government, on what it would do to solve our problems, to stimulate growth. I believe that when we examine the Democratic platform, when we examine the proposals that he has discussed tonight, when we compare them with the proposals that I have made, that these proposals that he makes would not result in greater growth for this country than would be the case if we followed the programs that I have advocated. There are many of the points that he has made that I would like to comment upon. The one in the field of health is worth mentioning. Our health program, the one that Senator Javits and other Republican senators, as well as I, supported, is one that provides for all people over 65 who want health insurance the opportunity to have it if they want it. It provides a choice of having either government insurance or private insurance. But it compels nobody to have insurance who does not want it. His program under Social Security would require everybody who had Social Security to take government health insurance, whether he wanted it or not.
Yo, dude's over here with the based opinion, opposing government publicly funded healthcare that is, as he is saying, compulsory. Doesn't sound like he would be an Obamacare stan. That's awesome. And I think it's actually interesting that the federal government basically viewed Obama as unconstitutional. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about that, but I do agree that it's a bad policy. It's nice to see that Nixon is not someone who would fall prey to such a similar political legislation.
And it would not cover several million people who are not covered by Social Security at all. Here is one place where I think that our program,
I wonder if he would support the policy if the healthcare would be universal.
Does a better job than his. The other point that I would make is this. This downgrading of how much things cost, I think many of our people will understand better when they look at what happened during the Truman administration, when the government was spending more than it took in. We found savings over a lifetime eaten up by inflation. We found the people who could least afford it, people on retired incomes, people on fixed incomes, we found them unable to meet their bills at the end of the month. It is essential that a man who's president of this country certainly stand for every program that will mean for growth. And I stand for programs that will mean growth and progress. But it is also essential that he not allow a dollar spent that could be better spent by the people themselves.
Let's go. Let's go.
The point was made by Mr. Nixon that the Soviet production is only 44% of ours. I must say that 44% in that Soviet country is causing us a good deal of trouble tonight. I want to make sure that it stays in that relationship. I don't want to see the day when it's 60% of ours and 70 and 75 and 80 and 90% of ours, with all the force and power that it could bring to bear in order to cause our destruction. Secondly, the Vice President mentioned medical care for the aged. Our program was an amendment to the Kerr bill. The Kerr bill provided assistance to all those who were not on Social Security. I think it's a very clear contrast. 1935, when the Social Security Act was written, 94 out of 95 Republicans voted against it. Mr. Landon ran in 1936 to repeal it. In August of 1960, when we tried to get it again, but this time for medical care, we received the support of one Republican in the Senate on this occasion. Thirdly, I think the question before the American people is, as they look at this country and as they look at the world around them, the goals are the same for all Americans. The means are at question. The means are at issue.
Yes.
If you feel that everything that is being done now is satisfactory, that the relative power and prestige and strength of the United States is increasing in relation to that of the communists, that we are gaining more security, that we are achieving everything as a nation that we should achieve, that we're achieving a better life for our citizens and greater strength, then I agree. I think you should vote for Mr. Nixon. But if you feel that we have to move again in the 60s, that the function of the president is to set before the people the unfinished...
Again, he's still acting like if you spend more money, then you're making progress.
The agenda for
progress is improving the country, not spending more money.
As a society, to meet our needs in this country and protect our security and help the cause of freedom. As I said at the beginning, the question before us all, that faces all Republicans and all Democrats, is, can freedom in the next generation conquer, or are the communists going to be successful? That's the great issue. And if we meet our responsibilities, I think freedom will conquer. If we fail to move ahead, if we fail to develop sufficient military and economic and social strength here in this country, then I think that the tide could begin to run against us. And I don't want historians 10 years from now to say, these were the years when the tide ran out for the United States. I want them to say, these were the years when the tide came in. These were the years when the United States started to move again. That's the question before the American people, and only you can decide what you want, what you want this country to be,
True.
what you want to do with the future. I think we're ready to move, and it is to that great task, if we're successful, that we will address ourselves.
Ready to move is not a policy.
Very much, gentlemen.
It's a platitude.
Gone by all too quickly. Thank you very much for permitting us to present the next president of the United States on this unique program. I've been asked by the candidates to thank the American networks and the affiliated stations for providing time and facilities for this joint appearance. Other debates in this series will be announced later and will be on different subjects. This is Howard K. Smith. Good night from Chicago.
Yo, that's cool. That's really cool. That was a good debate, y'all. Hold up, I'm gonna share this. I'm gonna share this here in my Discord so you guys can take a look at it. And I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on who won that presidential debate. I think that Nixon won, but I think it was close because I think Nixon, I think JFK at the beginning used a lot of unifying rhetoric. Nixon's rhetoric wasn't as good, but it was more logically sound. You know, if I had to vote for each of these two candidates, I definitely would go with Nixon. It sounds like he's taking a more temperate approach and saying, hey, why don't we have the American people solve these problems when some of these problems, like, you know, the overproduction of food, were caused by the government in the first place. He was making some really solid points there that I think it would be really hard to argue against. So in any case, I want to hear what you guys have to think. Leave a comment below or join my Discord. I think the link for the Discord should be in the description below. Yeah, that's pretty much all I got. I appreciate everyone for tuning in and for leaving comments in below and messages in the live stream. I'll be back again with another one of these debates soon. I'll be announcing it in advance like I did this time in my Discord, so you can check that one. I'll be reacting to the second debate between these two fellows. In the meantime, I'll be picking up some of my normal content, be streaming some games. I'll be doing some React content, so we'll see. I'll keep you guys appraised of my movements, but, you know, continue to expect the same old React and gaming content that you've been receiving for a while now. So in any case, I can see some clipping here. I need to work on this. In any case, thanks y'all for tuning in, and I will see you all later. Peace out, y'all.